In 1896, one of the most important events in Ghana's history took place, the exile of Otumfuo Nana Prempeh I, the Asantehene. This was a major turning point as it marked the moment when the mighty Ashanti Kingdom, one of the most powerful independent empires in West Africa, was brought under British colonial rule. But why was this great king sent into exile? To understand the reasons, we need to look at the relationship between the Ashanti Kingdom and the British, the events leading up to the exile, and the aftermath of this historical event. The Ashanti Kingdom was a powerful and well-organized state that had grown strong through military conquest and trade. At its height, the Ashanti Empire controlled a large area in present-day Ghana, known for its wealth, especially in gold. The Ashanti people were proud of their rich culture, skilled warriors, and the strength of their kings. The capital of the empire, Kumasi, was a center of trade, culture, and politics. The British, on the other hand, were also growing their influence along the coast of West Africa, particularly in the Gold Coast, now Ghana. They had set up forts and trading posts, and over time, they sought to expand their control inland. The British wanted to dominate trade and establish their rule, but the Ashanti Kingdom stood in their way. The relationship between the Ashanti and the British had always been tense. For many years, there were conflicts and wars between the two powers. The Ashanti wanted to keep their independence, while the British were determined to expand their influence. The British viewed the Ashanti as a threat to their ambitions in the region, especially because the Ashanti controlled valuable resources like gold. One of the major conflicts between the two was the Anglo-Ashanti Wars, which took place several decades. These wars were brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The British had superior weapons, but the Ashanti fought fiercely to protect their land and kingdom. By the 1890s, the British had grown more determined to conquer the Ashanti Kingdom once and for all. They saw the kingdom as an obstacle to their goal of controlling the entire Gold Coast region. They also feared that the Ashanti could form alliances with the other European powers like the French or the Germans, which could weaken British influence. In 1895, the British governor in the Gold Coast, Sir William Maxwell, made a bold demand to the Ashantis. He ordered Otumfuo Nana Prempeh I to accept British rule, to formally submit to the British crown, and to pay tribute as a sign of surrender. This demand was a direct challenge to the independence and dignity of the Ashanti people and their king. However, Nana Prempeh I, who had become the Asantehene in 1888, refused to submit. He was a wise and brave king who understood the importance of protecting Ashanti sovereignty. He wanted to maintain peace with the British, but not at the cost of giving up his kingdom's independence. He believed in negotiation, not war, and hoped to find a peaceful solution. In response to the British demands, Nana Prempeh I sent emissaries to negotiate. He even offered to open up trade and improve relations with the British, but he firmly rejected the idea of becoming a British subject. The Ashanti people also stood behind their king, unwilling to surrender to foreign rule. The British, however, were not interested in negotiations. They were determined to crush the Ashanti Kingdom and impose their authority. In December 1895, a large British expeditionary force led by Sir Francis Scott marched towards Kumasi. The British were well armed and had modern weapons, while the Ashanti forces were less equipped to fight such an invasion. Nana Prempeh I, knowing that his people could not win in a direct military confrontation, chose not to fight. He wanted to avoid unnecessary bloodshed and destruction of his kingdom. Instead, he allowed the British to enter Kumasi without resistance, hoping that by avoiding war, he could still negotiate peace. However, the British had other plans. On January 17, 1896, they arrested Nana Prempeh I along with several members of his royal family and close advisors. The British accused them of being rebellious and a threat to British rule. The Asantehene, who had been the symbol of Asante pride and independence, was now a prisoner of the British. After his arrest, Nana Prempeh I and his family were sent into exile. The British decided to remove him far away from his kingdom to prevent any possibility of him leading a resistance or uprising. In 1896, he was deported to Seychelles, a remote island in the Indian Ocean, thousands of miles away from the Ashanti kingdom. Along with him were his mother, Queen Asantehene, and other key members of the royal family. The exile of Nana Prempeh I was a devastating blow to the Ashanti people. For many years, their kingdom had stood proudly as a powerful and independent state. Now, their king was taken from them and their future was uncertain. The British took control of Kumasi, looted the royal palace, and gradually began to impose their rule over the Ashanti lands. In the Seychelles, Nana Prempeh I lived a life of relative isolation. Although he was not treated harshly, he was far from his people and his homeland. He spent 24 years in exile, cut off from the Ashanti kingdom. However, during this time, he remained a symbol of resistance and pride for the Ashanti people. His leadership and dignity in exile continued to inspire his people back home. Nana Prempeh I used his time in exile to educate himself further, becoming a devout Christian and learning more about the world outside Africa. He also maintained communication with his people and also hoped to return to his beloved Ashanti land one day. In 1924, after years of appeals and negotiations, the British finally allowed Nana Prempeh I to return to the Gold Coast. His return was celebrated by the Ashanti people, who still revered him as their rightful king. Although the Ashanti kingdom was now part of the British colony, the return of Nana Prempeh I brought a sense of hope and pride back to the people. He continued to serve as a leader and advisor to his people, even though he no longer held political power. Nana Prempeh I worked to preserve Ashanti culture and traditions, ensuring that the identity of his people remained strong despite the changes brought by colonial rule. The exile of Otumfuo Nana Prempeh I in 1896 was a significant event in the history of the Ashanti Kingdom and Ghana as a whole. It marked the end of the Ashanti Empire's independence and the beginning of British colonial domination in the region. However, Nana Prempeh I's courage, wisdom, and resilience in the face of adversity continue to be remembered as a testament to the strength of the Ashanti people. His life in exile and eventual return symbolized the unbreakable spirit of the Ashanti Kingdom, even in the face of overwhelming odds.